If I see any of these placements in your birth chart, I am going to do my best to avoid pissing you off. Because these are some placements that I typically associate with more explosive anger, impulsive anger, the type of anger that could tear you down in a matter of 5 seconds. Keep in mind, we do look at the entire birth chart to really get the full picture, so take this and any other series like this with a grain of salt, and be sure to comment below and let me know how you can relate. First, we gotta talk about harsh aspects between Pluto and Mars, an honorable mention to Pluto square Mars, though the conjunction works too. Pluto brings with it this immense fear of losing control, of powerlessness, and it also accesses everything we try to suppress and repress within the shadows. Whereas Mars, of course, is where we get our action, assertion, our drive. It's that primal energy. At its best, Pluto is here to guide us towards pretty intense transformation. And when it's squaring Mars, you might be overwhelmed by whatever comes up subconsciously or within your shadow. You're also probably a little bit more sensitive or highly tuned to how people communicate with you, and you're more likely to interpret different things as threats. And depending on your childhood experience, this can also look like going through these periods of trying to suppress and manage anger, only to inevitably be overcome by the repressed shadowy material that Pluto represents. And when Mars is conjunct Pluto, essentially the way you take action, assert yourself, express anger, set boundaries, is infused with that Plutonian underworld vibe. I will dominate the environment and I will dominate anybody that gets in my way. And ideally, these Pluto-Mars aspects in the chart are an invitation to redefine your relationship to control, power, powerlessness, shame, self-discovery, shadow work, but it usually takes us a little bit of effort to get there. So I'm going to stay on your good side as much as I can. Next, we have to talk about Aries energy, and in particular, Aries Moon and Mars. And Mercury. Okay, bonus points if you have multiple personal planets in Aries. Because Aries is the striking of a match. It's cardinal fire. It initiates, it responds, it creates. So Aries isn't necessarily known for being able to pause before reacting. So it'll say the thing, it'll discharge that emotion. The benefit here is that quite often Aries doesn't struggle quite as much with holding on to resentment. And one thing people don't really understand about Aries is that Aries is actually profoundly sensitive. The only difference is that sensitivity or hurt gets expressed as fire and anger. Aries is the definition of the fight trauma response. And especially if there are underlying feelings of hurt or a fear of abandonment or anything unresolved like that, that expression is going to be that much more gnarly. Because now we're talking about survival and abandonment wounds. You've got to find some way to channel all that primal energy because it's a beautiful thing, but it can also be a little hot sometimes. Which brings me perfectly into this next point. If you have a grand trine with fire signs, so Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. Grand trines are effortless flows of energy. The planets support one another. We don't always have as much of a choice or as much real agency when it comes to limiting what is passed along in a trine, which is why even though they're incredibly supportive, we also sometimes need to like slow down and figure out what's being conveyed in this trine. And fire is instinct, reaction, and survival. And especially if this grand fire trine is taking place between the 4th, 12th, and 8th house, so we're automatically dealing with a lot more shadowy themes and like collective unconscious themes and like suppressed, repressed trauma themes. Whew. That is intimidating in the best way. You guys can use that for some massive transformational good, but I'm definitely gonna do my best to like not piss you off. Next, if you have your moon square Mars, your moon is your emotional center. It is the foundation of your emotional well-being. So when it's making a square to Mars, on the one hand, I know that your inner critic is probably super gnarly, but on the other hand, it suggests that sometimes when you don't know how to process those deeper feelings, or even when you do, that square to Mars can make it really crunchy and honestly kind of severe. And especially if you have a really loud inner critic, or if you grew up navigating a lot of criticism, yeah, that's gonna be projected. It's almost like it's hard for you to engage with your anger and that protective quality of Mars in a way that is actually supportive and conducive to your moon's mental and emotional well-being. The image coming to mind is almost like if someone stands a little too close to you and you want to be like, oh, excuse me, can you step back a little bit? But instead, moon square Mars is like, excuse me. And then the person flies across the room. And then often the moon square Mars person is left with like shame and crunchiness internally because they didn't mean for it to come out like that. And then this self-perpetuating cycle continues. Now, if you have the moon conjunct Mars as well, almost like anger is the safest way for you to feel your feelings. So getting in touch with hurt or fear or anything underneath just feels extra unsafe. And that's already a hard thing to do even for the best of us. Not to mention, moon conjunct Mars often suggests that there was a little bit of a volatile childhood upbringing. Maybe you were navigating anger or unpredictability with a parent figure. So essentially, your baseline is fraught with that Mars energy of defense and attack and protect. The best way to channel that, by the way, is passion. Next, if you have Lilith in Aries or Scorpio. We all know the story of Lilith. She is the true bad bee of the birth chart, but quite often we start off with wanting to repress our Lilith energy or being told on numerous occasions that that part of us is too much. And the more we repress Lilith, the more shame we feel about Lilith, the louder and more powerful she becomes, as does anything within the shadows. So with Lilith and Aries, there's something here about your anger, feeling like I'm going to be on my own anyway, and rather than sit with the vulnerability associated with that, I'm just going to scare everyone off and make it very clear that I don't care about that. Depending on where it is in your chart too, sometimes this placement can suggest difficulty getting in touch with anger. So of course, this is where we want to look at the entire birth chart and take this all with a grain of salt. But Lilith and Aries, essentially the part of you that is so strong and can't be tamed is the part of you that says, I'm on top, I'm in charge, I'm not vulnerable, and I will prove it to you. Whereas Lilith and Scorpio, I think, really speak so much more to these immense emotional undercurrents. Scorpio is emotionally deep. Scorpio can really fear vulnerability because when Scorpio feels vulnerable, it's that much more susceptible to being attacked or harmed, which is why Scorpio gets that reputation for being all like cool, calm, collected, aloof, observant. That's the wall. That's the mask. Sometimes that anger will come up in moments of vulnerability or in moments of what you feel like should be connection. And that's because Lilith is terrified. And Lilith in Scorpio wants to do whatever it can to protect that emotional vulnerability. And quite often, this is so subconscious, we don't even realize what's happening. Even though Scorpio wants that connection and closeness, that Lilith placement denotes a lot of fear and some shame. You guys are here to be the alchemists and the transformers, but it requires that you guys stay really in touch with your own shadows and your own emotional fears. Ugh, I'm running out of time, so I gotta wrap this one up for now. But I love you all. Stay tuned for the next one. Bye.